So I think it's important to recognise that cases of financial mismanagement within the English Football League, at Premier League level, all the way down to League Two, they've been relatively infrequent. In fact, the last time that we had an administration in professional English football before this summer was Aldershot back in 2013. So the Premier League itself is in very decent financial health at the moment, buoyed by successive broadcast cycles that delivered upwards of 70% domestic growth cycle on cycle. However, of late, we've seen the latest cycle for the present season onwards has been negotiated at a reduced rate domestically, albeit made up for in international sales, resulting in still a slight increase. Now, the result of that means that we're forecasting, or should I say Deloitte are forecasting, in excess of £5 billion being generated by Premier League teams over the course of last season and this season. What it does mean is that clubs can no longer rely on those broadcast payments in terms of being massive step changes going forward. And as such, we're seeing more focus on commercial and match day sources. Now, commercial is untapped resource, it's infinite. You're seeing clubs that are generating huge commercial deals, the likes of Manchester City with Puma, Arsenal with Adidas recently, massive uplifts on their previous deals. And that's going to result in upwards of around £1.5 billion being generated from that revenue source per Deloitte as of this season going forward. And even match day, albeit finite, simply because you've only got so many seats and only so many prices that you can charge, you are seeing clubs making efforts to expand that revenue base and try and generate further match day and commercial opportunities from it. Tottenham Hotspur being the best example right now. So the transfer window in England, as of recently, has been reduced by around 2 weeks so that it begins, or should I say it closes, before the start of the domestic season in England. Now, that was done so and voted for by the Premier League teams so that they're able to settle their squads in advance of the new season. However, what we are seeing now is that you now have this 2-week window after the closure of the English period, whereby European teams are still able to buy from English talent pools, and it can be still quite unsettling. And obviously from an English perspective, if you're unable to then replace players who have been sold, you're in a situation where you may be understaffed for the first half of the season. In terms of expenditure, it's not really been much different. The latest window, it was reported that player purchases on a gross basis were around 1.4 billion. So that was summer 2019, which was marginally short of the domestic record in that respect. So we're not really seeing any changes to spending patterns per se. It's more a case of clubs are getting to the point where they believe that maybe it wasn't the greatest of ideas. It's been reported that clubs are merely looking to reverse that decision or come to a halfway point whereby they can still purchase from the European market up until the closure of that European window, rather than it being a blanket no more purchases policy. Match day revenue was one of the bread and butters of English football. Flash forward to now, and you can see a situation whereby if you split the revenue streams, match day, broadcast, commercial, match day is at one of its lowest proportions ever. I believe Deloitte reported it around 13-14% in the last few seasons, which shows that as a revenue stream, it is generally losing relative importance compared to commercial and broadcast. Now, from the perspective of broadcast, that has been a massive, and continues to be a massive source of revenue for English clubs, mainly driven by uplifts in broadcast rights over the last 5, 6, 7 years. However, as of the present cycle, beginning this season, we have seen that growth begin to stabilise. Still a little bit of growth, especially on the international side, and international broadcast sales is now an increasingly important aspect of any European club strategy at the top level, because domestic deals are starting to kind of tail off in terms of value increases. Alongside that though, you didn't have commercial deals, And in the world of financial regulation, whereby you've technically, within certain parameters, got to attempt to spend within your resources, whereby match day and broadcast are pretty set streams. Match day is match day, certain number of seats, certain prices. Broadcast, depending on being in the European competitions or how you do in the leagues aside, you get what you're given, whereas commercial is very much an untapped source in terms of how far it can go. And that's why you're seeing some of the big clubs, Manchester United being case in point of example, who one of the clubs that does it best, channeling massive amounts of their resources internally into creating commercial partnerships around the world and thus increasing that side of things. Because ultimately, the more revenue you have, the more you're able to spend on wages and player transfers and compete, so to speak, financially on the field. So I think it's important to recognise that cases of financial mismanagement within the English Football League, at Premier League level, all the way down to League Two, they've been relatively infrequent. In fact, the last time that we had an administration in professional English football before this summer was Aldershot back in 2013. And it's no coincidence that that time period since has been the inception of financial regulations to encourage clubs to spend within their means and not go down these routes to self-destruction almost. Now, the case with Bury is obviously very sad. The case in point is that they ultimately ran out of money after several years of heavy losses. I believe it was late August that their owner declared that he could no longer support them, and he was looking for new ownership to come in, which ultimately wasn't able to be found. And after several months of kind of financial uncertainty, staff not being able to be paid their wages, the Football League had no choice but to rescind their membership, so to speak, so as to safeguard the integrity of the league going forward. As I'm sure you can imagine, if you have a club who plays a certain number of games in the league and then can no longer play them, the circumstances, the problems it causes from a competitive point of view can get quite complex and convoluted. Now, the Football League themselves do have rules in place financially at Championship, League 1, League 2 level to manage profitability in the Championship and to manage wage expenditures down in League 1 and League 2, as well as having fit and proper ownership tests, which, again, looking back over the last few years where there have been no administrations, have been doing the job. So the question at hand becomes one of, was this fit and proper ownership test put in place accordingly, which I think it was, and if the Football League are able to do anything further, given the resources they have. But ultimately, you do have a set of regulations in place which are designed to make sure things like this don't happen, and ultimately since 2013 until now, it hadn't. Revenue streams are predominantly broadcast and commercial, and match day as a source is relatively less important, but progress can be made. And clubs are realising that if they want to expand on that revenue stream, then they've got to either expand their existing stadium or move to a different premises and take it from there. The best example being Tottenham Hotspur, who recently moved into the Tottenham Hotspur Stadium, now widely regarded as one of the best in the world. Now, the effects of that kind of strategy are twofold. Yes, you're going to increase your match day income, which is great. You've got enhanced capacity, probably charging slightly higher prices potentially if it's more of a luxurious environment. But on the flip side, the commercial opportunities all come into play, because if you have more space, then you've got more places where you can place partnership portfolios, boarding, hoardings, signage, but equally the partnerships that come into play. So again, taking the Tottenham example, who have signed a deal with the NFL, Tottenham New Stadium has a retractable NFL pitch in place now, which just goes to show the levels of interest they're taking in a foreign market, but equally the knowledge and know-how they have to be able to extract commercial partnerships and revenue in terms of the facilities that they've built.